I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our attempt at a virtual conference here with Alums for Campus Fairness. This is our second ever conference that we're hosting. Last year we had a smaller conference in February of 2020. So quite literally right before the world shut down for the pandemic that we're still going through today. We are incredibly excited to have so many partners, community members, leaders, founders, supporters who are with us today. And we wouldn't be able to be where we are without them. Obviously, this year has been quite a challenge for many, including Alums for Campus Fairness. As many of you most likely know and have seen through our social media and through our other petitions and whatnot, it's really been a challenging year for students. While we thought that COVID-19 changed the world in many ways, it also changed in some negative ways for the Jewish and pro-Israel community on campuses. We're seeing anti-Semitism has risen, especially on campuses where before students and like were intimidated perhaps in real life, and now it's online. And unfortunately, we're seeing that it's online. And when it is online, students have a lot more courage to say things and to become, frankly, more offensive and to create more of a threat to Jewish and pro-Israel students with whom we support. This is an important conference for us to come together as a community, albeit virtual, but what makes it special is that we're all across the country, across the globe, but at the same time, we're here today with one message, and that's digitally united against hate. That's what Alums for Campus Fairness is here for. We're here to combat anti-Semitism, to combat bigotry and anti-Zionism that's happening on campuses across the United States. And our work is more vital than it has ever been before. Our team has been busier than ever. We've made countless petitions and have had countless numbers of members of our network growing. There's clearly a need for what we're doing, and I'm thrilled to share with you that as of quite literally this week, we have surpassed the 10,000 member mark at Alums for Campus Fairness, which is an amazing feat to see what we've done in the last 6 years about it's been. And obviously, it's been a slow process, but at the same time, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our phenomenal co-founders, Dr. Mark Banchik, Laurie Joseph, Susan Julian, for helping to steer the way in the beginning. And obviously to the rest of our advisory board, being Jacob Baim, is the executive director of the Israel on Campus Coalition, who's with us, and you'll be hearing from in a breakout later this evening. And also obviously to Jerry Rothstein, the COO of Stand With Us. We would not be able to be as successful without all of your help, and I'm incredibly indebted to all of you for helping us get to where we are. I'd also like to take a moment personally to thank ACF's Associate Director, Joel Bond, for spearheading a lot of our efforts, especially during this conference, doing all the behind the scenes, making sure our AV and technical prowess is set up as best as we can. And we could not be more thrilled to have you, Joel, with us. And also to our newest team member, our executive assistant, Neil Yarkey. We're very excited to have you join us as well. And welcome everyone. I hope that you learn with all of us. I hope that you take in what we have to offer. Ask questions during our panel discussions. Again, we're going to have a couple of panels and then have a couple of breakouts for you to choose from, like a round robin. You can choose what's most interesting to you. And we hope that you enjoy, you learn, and of course that you hear from our two new keynote speakers whom we're happy to host, and that being Noah Tishby, who's a famous Israeli actress who's been in a lot of different television and movies in America, who just came out with a book on Israel quite literally a couple of weeks ago. And then also to hear from Deborah Lipstock, who's a historian and quite world-renowned. We're excited to have you all with us. We're excited that you're all here joining us. And if you have questions, we invite you to use the chat function below, but to keep yourself muted until we open it up to questions. And before we do that, though, we have a very special message. Joel, if you can cue it up, from ACF's closest partner, Roz Rothstein, who is the CEO of Stand With Us, has a message for all of you. So enjoy.
Hi, and welcome to a conference that promises to be amazing. Stand With Us is a proud partner of Alums for Campus Fairness. For those of you who may not know, Stand With Us is an international organization that supports Israel through education and inspiration and fights anti-Semitism around the world. Alumni were a previously untapped resource until the inception of ACF. There was nobody bringing alumni together in an organized fashion under one roof. ACF now is the unifying alumni voice and force in countering anti-Semitism and has become an important partner within the campus tapestry. Clearly, ACF has filled an important void. As we all know, many alumni care deeply about their alma maters and want to be involved. The vision of ACF's co-founders, Mark, Lori, and Susan, has been transformative. They took a stand at their alma mater, Vassar, and were successful, and realized that their work can become a model that can be replicated across the country. Their action led to concrete change, and we are grateful for their vision. The story of how ACF began reminds me of how Stand With Us got started 20 years ago. We began due to rising anti-Semitism and the violence in Israel. We began to deal with the media that was far too often leaving out important context about Israel. We began 20 years ago to fulfill the mission of standing up for Israel and its citizens against terrorism, fighting misinformation, and anti-Semitism. We have a mission like no other, and we stick to our mission, just like Alums for Campus Fairness. Stand With Us and ACF are natural allies in countering anti-Semitism and work every day to hold campuses accountable. Special shout out to Jerry Rothstein, COO and co-founder of Stand With Us, who was an important catalyst in helping to cement the important partnership between ACF and Stand With Us. We are proud to have helped and proud to continue to support the growth of ACF. Bravo to the leadership and staff for expanding ACF to nearly 50 campuses and approaching 10,000 members. Wow. Enjoy this important conference, and we hope to see all of you in person soon. Stay safe and ask lots of questions so you can learn as much as possible over the next few hours. I want to give a special shout out to Avi Gordon and Joel Bond, ACF professionals. You guys are dedicated and strategic and growing this amazing organization quickly so that we can do the badly needed work to stand up for students everywhere that need us the most. Have a great conference.
I'm an alumna of Barnard College, and I graduated in '92.
Emory University, class of 2019.
I'm a graduate of Cornell University, class of 90 and 91.
Syracuse University, class of 58.
Vassar College, class of 2001.
Columbia College of Columbia University in 1980.
My father went there. My husband and I met at Cornell. My oldest son is there.
I love many of the professors that I had there. I love the campus.
I was starting to read reports that Jewish students were being bullied and harassed and made to feel lesser than.
The situation is seemingly increasingly perilous for students.
If there's anti-Semitism on a campus, chances are it's a symptom of much bigger problems with the campus culture.
But I want to be there for students there right now who are struggling with the rising tide of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel movements on campus, delegitimization of Israel, and just harassment and intimidation of pro-Israel students.
We need alumni to help us fight anti-Semitism on campus. Join me.
We need alums to help fight anti-Semitism on campus. Join me.
Join me.
Join me.
Join me.
Please join me.
Thank you, Joel, for setting this up and for showing us those great videos. We're going to go dive right into it, and we're going to go, obviously, as you've seen and have heard, our work is more important than ever. And one of the most important assets that we have and should know about is the legal aspect of what's happening on campuses. What are the legal perspectives on campus anti-Semitism? What can we do on a legal level to help us? And I'd like to invite ACF Advisory Board member Laurie Josephs, and co-founder, I should say, to join me on the stage, if you will, along with our other speakers, Aliza Lewin, Yael Lerman, and Ben Ryberg, to join us all. And we can then get started, and I'll pass it off to Laurie.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. We are thrilled to have so many participants who, notwithstanding the upheavals and distractions of our COVID-challenged world, remain concerned and committed about our fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on the college campus. As Avi mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of ACF and a member of its advisory board. I am also a retired attorney, having practiced corporate litigation for many years. As an attorney, I understand the power of litigation to effect meaningful changes, especially when one is pushing back against those with the ability, resources, and incentives to silence you, as so often happens to pro-Israel students on the college campus. I am honored to introduce our three panelists who will give us their legal perspectives on campus anti-Semitism. They are Yael Lerman, Director of the Stand With Us Sadoff Legal Department; Aliza Lewin, President of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law; and Benjamin Ryberg, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Research for the Lawfare Project. So I have a few questions and I'm going to throw them out, and our panelists, one of them will choose to answer first. So the first question is, what are the legal challenges that organizations and students face when combating anti-Semitism on campus?
I'll take this first one. Laurie, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you to ACF, it's an honor. I think the biggest legal challenge we're facing is that a lot of anti-Semitism on campus is not legally actionable at first glance. It's toxic, it's outrageous, and appears to be perfectly legal bigotry to administrations. So much of our work as a legal department at Stand With Us is a matter of finding the violated laws and reminding administrations that they have a voice to use and hold them accountable. A simultaneous challenge I think that we have right now is that we live in an era of hypersensitivity around certain types of bigotry, but anti-Semitism in this moment is often treated with a totally different standard. Jews are generally not seen as part of a minority in need of protection. And another challenge is that at this particular moment, we aren't in an era where people or administrations necessarily care about individual rights. It is about group identity. So when Jews and Zionists are discriminated against on campus, that is an attack precisely on their individual right to be Jews or Israelis or Zionists, but people don't necessarily care. An example of these challenges surfaced this year at UC Merced. A professor posted a series of anti-Semitic images on his Twitter account, including an image of a Zionist brain filled with anti-Semitic stereotypes. The university initially dismissed calls to discipline this professor, saying it was academic freedom and he was using his private Twitter account. So in response, Stand With Us sent a legal letter to the UC Merced administration and led a community firestorm directed at the university for justice. Thanks in part to this, the administration opened a full investigation, instituted mandatory trainings on hate, and also new policies regarding anti-Semitism. We were contacted by concerned members and alumni and students who were instrumental in helping behind the scenes. And this is perfectly indicative of where we're at right now in terms of legal issues and anti-Semitism on campus. When anti-Semitism occurs, administrations hesitate. Their aggressive posturing and immediate repercussions come when it's bigotry, but not necessarily when it's anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And administrations have to be shamed or reminded by alumni, by organizations, by lawyers, that they will be held accountable.
Do any of the other panelists have additional thoughts?
Sure. I agree with everything that Yael said. And I also think that one of the real challenges that we have is trying to get administrators to even recognize what is happening as unlawful harassment and discrimination. One of the biggest challenges is that many administrators mistakenly believe that what they're witnessing on campus is just a political disagreement. They don't realize that what is actually happening on campus is part of a strategic campaign to marginalize and ostracize Jewish students. They're being pushed out. They're actually being pushed out of positions on student government. They're being pushed out of clubs. They're being pushed out. They're being told, particularly if they are Zionists, if they believe in and support the right of a Jewish homeland to exist, of Israel to exist as the homeland for the Jewish people, if they believe that, then they're being told you're not welcome on campus. And the university administrators don't understand that that is what is happening, that Jews are being labeled as beyond the pale. They're being told they should be excluded because they're racist, they're white supremacists, they're oppressors. So we shouldn't be including them. They are part of the group that we need to combat if we stand for justice. That's the education that we need to educate both the administrators, but we also need to educate the students and the alumni and the trustees, all to be able to articulate what's happening as harassment and discrimination. Because it's only if you can articulate it as harassment and discrimination that you can then apply the laws that require the university to protect the students from harassment and discrimination. Right? In this country, the First Amendment protects your right to express yourself as a bigot, and it doesn't protect you from an opinion you may find offensive. So as long as university administrators think this is just a speech issue, they feel that they don't have to do anything. It's only when they realize that Jews are actually being targeted, marginalized, demonized, and excluded that they realize that they actually have to take some kind of action.
And to show that is one of the things that you would advocate is the double standard, that other groups are not treated this way. Right?
That's for sure. I mean, as Yael said, other forms of bigotry are addressed. And part of that, I think, is because our society has sensitized people to anti-Black racism, to Islamophobia, right? To anti-Muslim hatred or anti-hatred of LGBT community, right? These are all the types of things that the university will very quickly jump to address. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, they don't see it. They don't view it as important. They don't care, and they don't actually recognize it sometimes as the anti-Semitism that it is. So
I would add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Lisa, please continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you to Alums for Campus Fairness so much for throwing this outstanding event. I also, not surprisingly, fully agree with everything both Yael and Elisa said. One other challenge I would mention is that a lot of students out there, I could not begin to give you a number, but in my experience, a lot of students out there, Jewish and Zionist students, still do not have any sense that there are legal protections at all that are available to them and that do protect them. They're also not aware at all of their resources. And I think, I don't want to put the burden on anybody, but I think this is why it's so important for groups that have boots on the ground, so to speak, on campus, make sure to convey to their students what's out there, what can help them, and give them some sense of how that help looks. For example, anytime I talk to a student about this or have any conversation about a potential campus situation, I start by telling them that by talking to me, that doesn't mean they're signing up for a lawsuit. That doesn't mean we ever have to speak again once we finish this call. They can hang up on me mid-sentence if they want to. And on top of that, no unilateral action is taken at any point without the student being on board. If they tell me, no, we don't want you to ever communicate with the school, we want you to help perhaps behind the scenes, that's fine. The lawyers here, all of us, are here to and are devoted to helping our clients, not our organizations, not the greater cause. I mean, yes, it's all those do kind of come together, but our main goal and responsibility is to serving our clients. And I think when students understand this, that they can come seek legal help, that they can do so confidentially, that again, if they want it to end after that call, that's fine. And just in general, they have some sense. They don't need to know the legal nitty-gritty. We're not trying to turn every student into a lawyer, but they have some sense of what protections are out there and what kind of situations might give rise to a legal violation. That's not to say that every one of these situations does give rise to a lawsuit. As Yael mentioned, it is often very difficult. A lot of the anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism can complicate the possibility of legal actions. But just for these students to know that there's something there, that they should seek help, if nothing else, then because there are certain statutes of limitations on actions. And if they wait around too long, if they don't engage in best practices regarding preservation of evidence, information gathering, that kind of thing, then when the time comes, they're going to find themselves out of luck, and we don't want that to happen. We want to help them in an effective way whenever we can.
Okay, so thank you.
Laurie, may I add just one last thing from what I'm seeing in the chats, because I think some people are raising really important points right now. Ben, Aliza, as always, I agree with you. I love listening to you guys and I love working with you. Everyone should know that we all frequently partner together and work together, and we're all stronger when we do so. I think that from our work with students at Stand With Us, the points that I'm seeing that critical race theory often, not always, but often has an anti-Semitic, definitely anti-Zionist tone to it. That Jewish students on campus are often being labeled as white supremacists, as white privilege, that Jewish students are up against this in a way that we didn't even see necessarily a year ago. This is definitely a huge challenge on campus. It's a legal challenge, and it's something that we are fighting and helping students fight every single day. So I just wanted to recognize that. David, I think, made that comment, and it's true, and it's a big problem. And as for the problems of higher education, yes, higher education is a mess right now. There's so many problems starting from middle school all the way through college in terms of being Jewish and what Jewish kids are facing. This is not legal, so I'm going to stop here. But I just noted this week that in a lot of high schools, people aren't even learning World War II anymore. I'm not talking Holocaust, I'm saying World War II. And if we aren't even learning this anymore, I don't even know where we'll be 10 years from now. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm so excited to have all these minds here thinking about it.
Okay, thank you, panelists. So my next question has to do with something that was issued under the Trump administration. And I'm talking about Executive Order 13899. And my question is, what are the practical implications of it for stemming the tide of anti-Semitic activity on the college campus? And whoever takes this question, if you could just briefly explain what the order was and where it stands now and how it might be effective.
Sure, Laurie, I'll start there. So in order to understand President Trump's executive order on combating anti-Semitism, you need to understand a little bit of the history of Title VI and how Title VI of the Civil Rights Act has been applied. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is a law that basically says that any entity that receives government funding may not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. What's interesting is that Title VI does not include religion as a protected category. That was actually deliberate at the time that it was enacted. Part of the reason for that is because religious institutions wanted to be able to be sure to continue to hire, sometimes make faith-based decisions that way, and didn't want that to be considered discrimination. The problem is that years later, that led to certain difficulties, particularly after 9/11, when there were members of faith-based groups that were suffering discrimination on campuses, because almost every university in the United States, public and private, receives some kind of government funding. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act applies to them all. There's a very, very small number of universities that are funded exclusively through private donations. So Title VI applies to them all. And basically what it means is that the government can't give money to a university that's not protecting its students, that's engaging in unlawful discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. So after 9/11, Muslims were being discriminated against, and Sikhs who were being mistaken for Muslims were suffering from tremendous discrimination. So the question came before the Office of Civil Rights, because if a university is violating Title VI, then individuals who feel that their rights, that they've been discriminated against, have a choice. They can either go to court and bring a case in court, or they could go the administrative route, which is to file a complaint with the Department of Education, which was called the Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, in the Department of Education. And the Department of Education would then review these complaints, and they wield a very significant hammer, because if the Department of Education finds that a university is engaging in unlawful discrimination, they can cut off all of that university's funding. The universities clearly don't want that. So what ends up happening is that they engage in negotiation with the Department of Education and come to an agreement as to what steps they need to take to address that harassment and discrimination to satisfy the Department of Education so that they can continue to receive the government funds. So the question came up when these religious groups after 9/11 were complaining that they were suffering from harassment and discrimination, does the Department of Education even have jurisdiction to review those complaints? Because these are religious groups and Title VI doesn't include religion. Ken Marcus, who is the founder of the Brandeis Center and is also now our chairman, he actually was serving in 2004 his first stint as head of the Office of Civil Rights when this question came up. And he concluded, of course, members of faith-based groups receive the protection of Title VI when they're being harassed or discriminated against on the basis of race or national origin or ethnic origin discrimination. And just because they are also members and share a common faith doesn't mean they lose the protections of racial, national, ethnic origin discrimination. So he wrote a Dear Colleague letter at that point in 2004 explaining this. In 2010, that was in the Bush administration. In 2010, during President Obama's administration, the Department of Justice came out with the same understanding of Title VI, and they wrote a Dear Colleague letter that quoted from and followed the same guidelines and said that we agree that although Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion, discrimination against Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and members of other religious groups violates Title VI when that discrimination is based on the group's actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, rather than the member's religious practice. So from 2010, for the past decade, you have had the Department of Justice and the Department of Education that have understood that when members of religious groups are targeted on the basis of their shared ancestry and ethnicity, they are protected by Title VI. So now, what did the executive order do in 2019? What it did was a few things. Number one, it kicked this protection up a notch. So instead of now just being on the level of these Dear Colleagues, or what they would call sub-regulatory guidance and advisory letters, this now brought it up to the level of an executive order, where the president said, this is how we understand Title VI. It applies to all these groups, and particularly to Jews, as well as these other groups, when they're being targeted on the basis of their shared ancestry or an ethnicity. It also expanded it, so now it applies to all the agencies in the executive branch that provide funding that would be covered by Title VI. So it's not just the Department of Education and Department of Justice. It's now all the federal agencies. And then most significantly, what it did is it linked Title VI to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And it said, if you want to understand what it means, if you want to understand what anti-Semitism, what national origin, ethnic origin discrimination against Jews looks like, look to the IRA definition. Look to the IRA definition to understand whenever you are confronted with an allegation of anti-Semitic harassment against Jews on the basis of their shared ancestry or ethnicity. That's what this did. And you can see the significance of it because the first opinion, the first resolution agreement that was reached after the executive order was passed required, and this was with NYU, required NYU to incorporate the IRA definition into the university's own anti-discrimination policies. So what it is doing is compelling the universities to now recognize the anti-Semitism as described in the IRA definition as anti-Semitism and as unlawful harassment and discrimination of Jews.
Elisa, what is the status of this executive order now?
It is still in effect, like executive orders that past presidents have adopted and have issued. It was not rescinded. There were several executive orders that President Biden rescinded early on in his presidency. He did not rescind this one. It is, I know people had made comments because it's no longer on the current White House website, but it is still on the archived Trump website, the same way all executive orders from prior administrations are on the websites, the archived websites of those administrations. So it's still in effect. And the question now will just be how forcefully the Department of Education decides to follow it. But it is, you know, in terms of universities, it is still the standard that applies.
Do any of the other panelists want to add to what Elisa said? No? Okay, next question. What legal resources are available to students who are victims of anti-Semitism on campus? Who wants to take that? Ben? Okay. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I was getting a message saying the host was not allowing anybody to unmute, but here we are. Thank you for the question. Well, you're looking at some of the resources right here. I would say some of the, if not the main resources for students. That's what our organizations do. I would say at least 50%, if not more, of our work at the Lawfare Project involves campus matters. And I sort of alluded to this in my response to the first question, but when I talk about addressing these issues, this can range all the way from advising students completely behind the scenes about, you know, what, say someone calls with an issue that doesn't quite reach what we think would be the legal threshold at this point, advising them what to do, how to hopefully work with the administration, what offices to go to, what procedures and materials they need to be familiar with. We will sit there and walk them through this stuff if they need, and we're happy to do so because certainly codes of conduct and other university materials are not necessarily written in the most straightforward or user-friendly manner. And listen, understandably, students often don't have the patience to go through pages and pages hoping they find what it is that's relevant to their situation. So all the way from helping them really understand their school's policies, what office should they go to if and when they need to file a bias complaint? Is a bias complaint the appropriate step? How do we draft that complaint? Any number of these things we help students with. If they do want, and we think it's appropriate for us to be liaising directly with the university on their behalf, we will do that. I know this is my colleagues as well. We offer endless, certainly endless now in the time of Zoom, endless training sessions for students, again, with this specific goal of giving as many of them as possible, even a taste of what's available to them and what their rights are. And then at the Lawfare Project, if it does become time or it gets to the point, for example, as it did in our lawsuit with against San Francisco State, a few years ago, which we are now engaged with again and may have to haul back into court to enforce some provisions of our settlement agreement with them. If it gets to that, students should come to us. Often these matters are quite complex. If we're talking about a lawsuit, the Lawfare Project will go to any of its 500 plus private practice attorneys and recruit whoever we think is best and whoever we can to come in as a partner in litigation. And we go forward. We do whatever it is that we need to help these students. And I would even say some matters that aren't so much legal or even getting to the legal point, but students often want to know, what are potential legal implications of BDS so they can communicate effectively if they are, say, attending a hearing of a student governing body to discuss a BDS resolution that's on the table. What can they say about it? How do they explain that engaging in BDS may and often does violate various state laws, could violate, and that this is tantamount to unlawful discrimination? How do they oppose and rebut the arguments that this is just protected speech and freedom fighting, things like that. If a resolution is a student government resolution or other legislative instrument, if you will, is passed, was it passed properly? If not, is there a way, what are the procedures for challenging it? Really helping with, I would say, giving a holistic approach and helping in any manner, in any situation where these students need it. There are a lot of issues that come out of student government. In my experience, most of those do not or have not given rise to legal action. And I would say, again, in my opinion, in and of themselves, do not tend to pave the way for Title VI complaints. They could certainly be a component of that, but alone, that generally I have seen is not enough to constitute the type of hostile environment that would implicate Title VI. But what else do we do about it? How do we, and even how do we garner support from other students? How do we get them all in the same, delivering the same message and ensuring that that message is correct, that we are making the right points and we are addressing, again, rebutting the endless misinformation and wrong points that the other side is presenting. Yeah, I could give a number of other case examples, but I don't want to monopolize all the time. I will turn it over to whoever else would like to continue.
Just one quick question before you do that. When a student is facing this situation, how does he know to reach out to you?
Well, we work very well. Part of it is we advertise. We put ourselves out there on Facebook and the Jewish press in particular, wherever we can. But we're still a small entity, so we rely a lot on our partner organizations. I'll give a shout out to one. Israel on Campus Coalition does an amazing job in everything they do with Campus Matters. We'll go to them if something comes up, but they'll come to us. All these groups that actually have, as I said earlier, boots on the ground on campus, they're the ones who need to be telling us, because these students, assuming they even know that we exist, they may not quite understand when is it time, is it appropriate? People are intimidated by lawyers. I don't think the three of us are particularly intimidating, except when we decide we want to be. But students don't know that. College students have probably not dealt with lawyers much, if at all, in their lives, and just don't know at all what they're getting into. So again, I don't mean to keep harping on this point, but as I said earlier, it's so important that the groups and individuals who work with the students make sure they know what resources are available to them, because I don't want to rely on students just Googling and hoping they find the right place.
Right. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in?
I'll weigh in just on that last point. Ben, I agree with everything you said. That you're exactly right, and that students need to be informed and don't necessarily always know. At Stand With Us, we're a campus organization. We have hundreds of high school interns and college interns. So every year at our annual conferences, what we do a lot of our time is tell them, if a legal issue comes up, turn to our legal department, turn to your campus coordinator, turn to whoever you trust and get legal help. Don't try to go at this alone. I think about the Max Price case recently that Eliza handled, and Max Price was being threatened with being thrown out of his role in the Student Senate for standing up for Israel. And I shiver to think what would have happened to him if he hadn't gone and gotten that legal representation. It's critical that students reach out for help and know that there's multiple resources out there. There's Stand With Us, there's Lawfare, there's Brandeis Center. There's many different resources out there for them, and we all want to help them, and that's what we're here to do. I want to also just quickly say that I've seen in the chat some really excellent questions. I know we'll get to them. I just want to make sure that as part of what we're saying right now, if a student has a question about holiday observance, for instance, this year, the start of the school year is probably going to be overlapping with Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day after Labor Day. And so a lot of students who do observe Rosh Hashanah will be probably missing out on orientation, on their first meetings with teachers, on lots of very important experiences. And so we've already at Stand With Us notified every university in America to be aware of this and to help students get the religious accommodation they need. We're also working with Hillel. But if any student feels that they're worried about this issue, please reach out to any of us, Ben, Eliza, me, we will all help you. Another question that I saw is, how do you report an incident? How do you report a bias incident? Stand With Us has an intake form on our website. I'm sure Ben and Eliza also have intake forms. Just come to one of us and we will help you. We really could hope it couldn't be easier for you to reach out and get help if you need help.
Okay,
And
we're
if I
running
can-
a little short of time, so.
I want to make sure that people do know of one important resource, because the Brandeis Center has a program for law school students where what we do is we call them our Jigsaw Fellows, our Justice Initiative guiding student activists worldwide. We've developed a curriculum where we teach the law students the areas of law they need to understand in order to be able to assist the undergraduates who are confronting and who are really on the front lines when it comes to combating the anti-Semitism on campus. And we've done this specifically because, as Ben noted, students often are too intimidated to come to lawyers. And the truth is, it's really important for students to seek the legal guidance as early as possible, because sometimes it's better for them to be contacting a lawyer who will tell them that you should be notifying the university informally about what's happening and not filing a formal bias complaint. Because sometimes what happens is if you use the formal bias complaints on the system, all that does is it enables the university to protect themselves because they claim to have investigated, then they do nothing satisfactory. And what happens is it removes the jurisdiction from the Office of Civil Rights from reviewing an issue that the university already claims to have dealt with and investigated. So our program, our Jigsaw program, we make Jigsaw students available to undergraduates. And what we've done is we've let all the different organizations that are working on the campuses, so, Hasbara Fellowships, CAMRA, obviously Stand With Us, the Lawfare Project there, but ICC. And what's happening and what we see happening, the IAC, is that now these groups, when they have students who they work with who face anti-Semitism on campus, they recommend to the students to come and to seek that legal strategic guidance before they file complaints, before they go for meetings with administrators. We can help with the talking points, all the things that Ben was saying. But we can also pair you up with a law student who will work with the undergraduates. So I would suggest, if there are people here, first of all, if they know law students who are interested in becoming Jigsaw Fellows, we're always looking for those. And if there are undergraduates who need it, they can reach the Brandeis Center at info@brandeiscenter.com and we can pair them up.
Thank you. Thank you. So just to go back to the organization of alums, how can alumni help the students? Any thoughts on that from our panelists?
I'll say, first of all, just show your support. I frankly don't know what that looks like because I'm not in the advocacy world, so to speak, so much as in the legal world. And I won't claim to be an expert in anything that I am not in, but show them that you're there for them. So many of these students I find, maybe less so those who are, say, fellows with various Zionist organizations, various Jewish organizations, and have that community, but a lot feel like they're going at this alone. And I think knowing that there is a base out there, that their community is helping them in any way, even if it's just saying, we care about what you're dealing with, we would like to help you, you tell us what you need, but knowing you're there and having that support can be very meaningful. Certainly whatever influence alumni can exercise to, for example, ensure that administrators and relevant campus faculty and staff are educated on issues such as Title VI, its mere existence, the IRA definition, the fact, what it means, the fact that the Department of Education is mandated to consider it in evaluating alleged discrimination. I had a situation recently where a student at a New York college who is very, very involved in Jewish student life, works with a lot of different organizations, and is also quite well versed in all these matters that we've talked about, went to the relevant office to file a discrimination complaint. And the person who was helping, who was not some executive assistant, but an official in the office, kind of looked at her like she was crazy when she mentioned Title VI, had no idea what the IRA definition was, even when she started explaining it. The fact that faculty or staff, and that administrators whose job it is to ensure that the law is upheld and that discrimination does not happen and is dealt with properly in accordance with the law, that school policies are implemented in accordance with the law. The fact that they don't even know about some of these things is outrageous understatement. So whatever influence all of you have as alumni to really push these people and make sure they understand why this is important, why do they need to know about this? They are setting themselves up to have a better campus climate and be more inclusive and welcoming to Jewish students. Surely they should want that. If they don't want that, that's a whole other issue. And then then maybe you figure out how to call them out on that. But whatever influence you have, use it.
Thank you, Ben.
I would just add very quickly that if you have, if you're in a position to get your university to adopt the IRA definition, there's really no more important work that could be done. We really need that on every possible campus where we can make that happen. If you're a lawyer and you want to volunteer your time as a pro bono attorney, Stand With Us has a pro bono attorney network. I won't speak on behalf of the other organizations, but volunteer your time as an attorney, volunteer your time obviously as an alum. And the last thing I would say is that never underestimate, as Ben said, the pressure of alumni dollars and alumni voices. Look what happened at Oberlin. I'm losing sleep right now over what's happening right now at Pomona College. If you are an alum of Pomona College or your kids are at Pomona, that is the campus to be watching right now. If there's time, I'm happy to fill you in on what's going on there. But I actually think that legal work is incredibly important, but it's the alumni who actually have the biggest influence right now.
Thank you, panelists. I think we have just a few minutes for some questions that arose.
Yeah, Laura, we have time for probably one question just to
Okay.
keep with the conversation and keep the conference moving. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the chats, which is excellent. And Yael, Ben, Lisa, even Laurie, if you want to, feel free to answer them in the chat also, so so that the conversation can continue even virtually as we continue. But we can open it for one more. I know that someone wanted to ask a question. I think it was John Weiss who wanted to ask in person with his video, and I want to welcome him to do so.
Oh, thank you so much, Avi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, I have family in Israel. I support Israel, but I'm not religious. I support Israel because of human rights. I support Israel because displacement. And I feel like much or all of what I'm hearing from organizations like this is an emphasis on Jews rather than emphasis on human rights. For example, the San Francisco Zionists recently published a post that said, France has abandoned the Jewish community. And that was really disappointing to me. I think that France has abandoned human rights, justice, and science. And I'd like to know, I'd like to hear some responses about perhaps making this not just about Jews, but about more universal issues. Thanks.
Any panelists want to weigh in?
You're absolutely right that it's a human rights issue. And I think that, you know, what we see happening today is that when society is saying we have to welcome everyone to the table with their complete identity, the one group that is being told no, you first have to either hide or shed this part of who you are in order to be accepted, are the Jews. The one group that's being told, we deny you the right to describe what you view as hostility and harassment and discrimination of you and your identity, are the Jews. And you're absolutely right that that is a violation of human rights. The denial of the Jews' history, the denial of our lived experience and our connection, our indigeneity to the land of Israel, that's also there's now a term, erasive anti-Semitism, right, that people have started to use, which is true. Denying the Jews and trying to erase our experience and our history is a form of anti-Semitism, but it's also, I think you're absolutely right, a human rights violation and should be understood that way.
I agree completely. I'll keep this brief, but I don't know that I would certainly highlight the human rights aspect, the civil rights aspect, the legal aspects of this. Again, as I mentioned earlier, under various state laws, actually engaging in BDS, refusing to do business with somebody because they are Israeli, because they are Jewish, that's illegal and you can sue somebody. We have done that. So I think highlighting that, saying this is not about advocacy. This is not, you want to compare it to South Africa, whatever you want to do, even though that's ludicrous. We can't stop people from speaking. But if you carry this out, what you are advocating for is unlawful discrimination, violates civil rights, and and there you go. But I don't know that I necessarily think it's a good idea to remove Judaism from the conversation. I think if we look at other minority groups and their movements, and most recently the Stop Asian Hate. Hope I'm not messing that up, but you know what I'm talking about. Various other movements, Black Lives Matter, they acknowledge very loudly and clearly that what they are combating is hatred, discrimination, unlawful treatment of members of their group based on their protected class, their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their national origin. And partly, if you remove that protected class from the conversation, I think it may muddle the legal argument a bit. But we all know that the anti-Semitism out there, I mean, there is hatred towards Jews. It is, unfortunately, I would say, quite systemic in higher education. It is all around us. You can pick up the paper and see various incidents of anti-Semitism all over the country. I was in Michigan visiting family for the weekend. The ADL just released a piece that I think anti-Semitic incidents had gone up 21%. I believe that's the right number, over the past year. So we know it's out there, and I don't think there's any reason we need to deny or even just sort of gloss over the fact that the motivation behind these unlawful, disgusting, unacceptable acts is hatred of Jews. We need to address it, we need to call it out, and we need to elevate it to the same level where it is unacceptable, just like hatred and prejudice against other groups is seen as unacceptable in polite society.
Yeah, I think we ran out of time, but I want to thank our wonderful panelists for all of your insights, and all the panelists have invited questions through the chat, and we'll respond and can contact them even apart from this. So thank you all.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone on this panel, and thank you to Laurie for moderating, and obviously to Yael, Aliza, and Ben, with whom we work regularly. We are really thrilled that we were able to have you all join us and be with us. Again, if you have questions still about on the legal aspect, perhaps Ben, Aliza, Yael, you can stay a little bit and answer some questions on the chat. But Ben, you brought up about the ADL's recent report, which is their audit, I think, of 2020. Of 2020. And that actually is a great transition, because we're now we're about to go into our next panel that will discuss anti-Semitism today. We'll include Daron, who works with ADL, which we'll go to in just a moment. But before that, we have a video we want to show you. So Joel, go for it. We're seeing students who are feeling isolated and feeling threatened in many ways because of their Judaism. Students are afraid to wear a yarmulke or an IDF shirt or something, or things to that effect. And it's becoming more and more radicalized. Swastikas are being drawn.
Anti-Semitic hate speech, harassment, and microaggressions have peaked at colleges around the country.
I also felt some of those remnants of feeling personally attacked because I was Jewish, because I loved Israel, etc. And I think that's what we've seen a lot more of, is that overt feeling that many students have.
Alumni can help make our campuses a safer place for Jewish and Zionist students.
I think that it's important for all of us to rise up and come together as a community, and that's what we aim to do at Alums for Campus Fairness, is bring alumni together as a unified alumni voice to help support the students on the ground who are facing these extreme challenges. We try to counter bigotry as one alumni voice. We're always open to work with allies, and we will continue to do so until this ends.
Join us to support education over bigotry.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joel, for showing that. And I'm going to bring our panelists onto the virtual floor. So if you bear with me for just a moment as I bring everyone in. Just 1 second. And all right. So I think I have everyone with us. So welcome to our second part of our discussion in our conference, Digitally United Against Hate, here at Alums for Campus Fairness. I'm honored to moderate. I'm honored to have so many friends and partners with us, and to join us. First, on my screen to my right is Daron Ezekson forgive me if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. I hope I did, Daron. Daron is the vice president of the Mid-Atlantic / the Midwest division of the ADL. As vice president of the Mid-Atlantic / Midwest division, Daron and his teams in Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philly, go Philly, Washington, D.C., they work daily to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. I'll continue to tell everyone else's stories as well so that we can just dive right into it. We also have then, next is Rachel Fish, who's the founding executive director for the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism. Dr. Rachel Fish is the founding executive director of the foundation. Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the New England Patriots, established the foundation to catalyze dynamic new solutions to stop the age-old hatred advanced by those who seek the elimination of Judaism and the Jewish people, and the modern movement to destroy the world's only Jewish state, being Israel. Again, part of my brevity, but I'll just move on to Carly Gammel, who's the director of Stand With Us's Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, and she's the counsel for litigation strategy at the Stand With Us Side Off Legal Department. So she wears multiple hats. And Carly is a seasoned constitutional litigator with extensive experience handling matters involving free speech and religious liberties and fighting anti-Semitism. So thank all of you for joining us and for being a part of our very important conversation that we're having. I appreciate you all coming from all over the country to be with us here and to have a really important conversation, I think, that is quite apropos right now. So let's just dive into it. If any of you, whoever wants to kick it off, how has the nature and scope of anti-Semitism changed since the pandemic began? You know, obviously we've had a pandemic now for a year. What have you seen in changes? And maybe, Daron, maybe we want to start with you. You can talk about the audit and what you've seen, what the ADL has seen as well. And then we can pass it on to Carly, Rachel, whoever wants to take it from there. So Daron, please.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you all for the invitation and for your participation in this really important conversation today. It's really a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to learning from my co-panelists as well. So, you know, we at the ADL have been in the business, unfortunately, of combating anti-Semitism for 108 years. And we all know that anti-Semitism is, in its perennial forms, entirely capable of accommodating new politics, new challenges. It is particularly acute in times of social stress, economic stress. And what we have witnessed over the last several years are unprecedented levels of reported anti-Semitic incidents. That's the audit that Avi referred to. We just announced yesterday the results of our 2020 audit, which reflected on a national level a slight decrease year to year of overall incidents. But depending on geography, it did demonstrate, as was referenced in some states, significant increases. And what it also demonstrated is, notwithstanding COVID and sort of our retreat into our virtual spaces, that the hate metamorphosized itself into many forms of online hate, and really disturbingly, the level of harassment increased and the number of incidents of harassment increased. You know, there are other metrics to measure the state of anti-Semitism, if you will, and we also look at attitudes. In a recent survey, we confirmed that 63% of American Jews have experienced some form of anti-Semitism in the last 5 years. That 36% of those incidents are online, in the online space, and more about online as we continue our conversation. And fully 59% of American Jews surveyed say they feel less safe than they did a decade ago. So what is reflected in the incidents is not the whole story, but it is a warning sign that we are in a period in our history, as we have been in the past, both American history and Jewish history, obviously, where permission has been given. We have a new platform that enables the leveraging of old hate and the emergence of new. And we see it on both ends of the political spectrum. We see it coming out, and we'll talk more about that, in the form of emerging violent white nationalism or white supremacy. And we see it in the context of many spaces related to anti-Zionism. So it is a picture of elevated incidents and an elevated sense of concern across the Jewish community.
Thank you. Carly or Rachel? It looks like Carly, you're unmuted, so I'll pass it to you.
Thanks. I think I would just add to that. I mean, obviously the ADL does a fantastic job when it comes to the statistics on these things and gathering the reports on that. I think that, that everything that was just mentioned, what that lends itself to, because we are seeing so much more online anti-Semitism. I think the thing that jumps out really the most to me is just like, you asked about the scope, and because of the global nature of the internet, I think that it has just magnified the exposure and the mobilization, if you will, of anti-Semitism. That the audience has grown in some ways for people who maybe wouldn't have necessarily engaged in, it wouldn't have been their first thought, right, to go online with their anti-Semitism, but during the pandemic, that's really been the outlet that's available. And so again, I think that again, that what's really been highlighted for me, and what we've seen and I know we'll talk about this more some too, just on campuses, that there's been a shift, and so the exposure, the audience has grown in many ways. And one of the things that we saw, thankfully, I feel like we've seen a little bit of a downward trend in it, but one of the I guess issues with the scope of this is when celebrities take to social media to make comments, and unfortunately we've seen a number over the course of the last year of anti-Semitic statements, whether they were intended or not, by celebrities, and again, just thinking about the global scope and the following of people. And so when more people are online on a more regular basis, and then you've got people with huge followings online that are perpetuating some of these thoughts and ideas, again, I think that just magnifies things, in a way that unfortunately, we like to talk about in some ways how, even we are able to reach more people with our message, with our education, and the things we've been able to accomplish from home. But unfortunately, this is something that's being, quote unquote, accomplished as well on the side of anti-Semitism and anti-Semites.
Thank
Right,
you.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Carly and Daron. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I just want to build on what was already said, which is the internet is a loud and obnoxious space, period. And because of that, it also lends itself towards greater incivility. What you say online, you wouldn't necessarily say in the public square. And individuals do so also with a sense of anonymity. So it exacerbates exactly what you're saying, Carly and Daron, in terms of what is playing out in the different social media platforms and in terms of digital content. We also know that some of the individuals who may not necessarily engage in this conversation, if it was live, so to speak, are more emboldened to do so from the security of the privacy of their home. And not only that, what we are finding is that in an age in which we know people, like always, have desired connection and meaning and seeking community, at the same time are becoming less engaged with established organizations, less affiliated with traditional forms of community, and are more individualized. So when they tend to seek community, they're turning to places in which their ideas can be radicalized more quickly. And they will find ideas that can be seductive because it seems as if they are, quote unquote, seen by individuals who are actually promulgating really hate-filled vitriolic positions. And that can come from the political right, it can come from the political left, it can come from different communal identity groups. And we know that identity politics, unfortunately, is the way in which our society is engaging with one another, which continues to lead to this divisiveness and this politicization. And when that happens, Jews ultimately are in the crosshairs between all of these groups and does not lend itself to a productive position for the Jewish community.
Great points by all, and thank you for sharing. To that end, I wanted to, we're talking a lot about online. Rachel, I think you hit the nail on the head about, people are sharing things online that they would never say to someone's face. And that's certainly happening to students as well. We're seeing a lot of students being attacked, and actually we partnered with an organization called Jewish on Campus. They spoke on a webinar of ours a few months ago, and we're working on a survey with them of current students to share about their experiences, and recent alumni to share about their experiences of anti-Semitism on campuses. And they're sharing a lot of different situations of things that are happening on campuses, whether it be in real life or online. But to that end, to being online, what are the most effective ways to combat anti-Semitism? What do you think we can be doing about it? Rachel, I know that you're working on a nice initiative. Maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that I have to say, as much as I appreciate what Jewish on Campus is doing, and it is providing an outlet for students, it's highly problematic ultimately that all of this is being done with anonymity, meaning none of these students actually put their name out there and are reluctant to do so. And I know how hard it is. I have been in those situations as a student, but it's problematic if we don't put our names on these things, because it's like Harvey Milk, right? When Harvey Milk was encouraging folks from the LGBTQ plus community to come out, it was the coming out that humanizes those experiences. When you realize, your Uncle Larry is gay, it doesn't make you like Uncle Larry any less. It helps you understand who Uncle Larry is, or your favorite PE coach, whomever it may be. So when we don't humanize these situations and we're constantly hiding behind fear, and I'm not suggesting that it isn't challenging or that it's not hard, but it actually doesn't help solve so much of the challenges, because we as individuals, as humans, are not seen. And so it creates this illusion of what is actually taking place on campus. And I also will say, with people like Eliza Lewin, Carly, and other lawyers from Lawfare, students have a real ability to be empowered. It's not like 20 years ago. There are real actions that can be taken at the level of the student, to the faculty, to the university administration. We have to stop thinking that we as Jews need to hide behind the insecurities in order to actually be heard. It's really problematic. And again, knowing it's hard. What I would just tell too is that the work that we're doing through the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism is mostly through our public facing initiative right now. And that public facing initiative is through the social media work that we've created called Together Beat Hate, which is trying to put the Jew hatred conversation in relationship with other forms of hatred, not to universalize and diminish the unique characteristics of each form of prejudice and bias and discrimination that exists, but so that we do not continue to silo Jew hatred as something that shouldn't be recognized as a form of hatred, or only be a Jewish problem. Meaning, we know that in order to fight racism, it's not solely up to Black people and brown people and people of color, but it should be all of humanity. Similarly, to fight transphobia and homophobia, we need all individuals to engage in that work. So we want to put the Jew hatred conversation in relationship to these other forms of hatred. And also because what we realized is that the majority of folks that we're trying to reach, which are 13 to 35-year-olds in the middle, so not the detractors and not the people who are on this call, but the majority of folks who truly don't know. And what they don't know is that they don't know what anti-Semitism is. They have no idea. The reason we know they have no idea is because when we actually surveyed 10,500 13 to 35-year-olds, they said, well, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-homophobic, I'm anti-Islamophobic. So yeah, I'm probably an anti-Semite. And you're thinking, no, you're an anti-Semite, right? But they don't even know what the term Semite means. So we have to change the conversation in order to make sure that don't knows put anti-Semitism in this framing, and so that we can make Jew hatred socially unacceptable in the 21st century.
And if I could add to that, Rachel, in absolute agreement. And part of this is education. And by the way, I think education begins with the Jewish community in this regard. We find that many students, Jewish students, are not sufficiently trained or empowered to understand what they will face on campus, to have the arguments understood, to understand the resources available to them. There is, even within the Jewish community, a lack of sufficient understanding of what current day anti-Semitism is, or for that matter, the definitions of Zionism and what Zionism represents. And we do need to take back the meaning of Zionism. In too many spaces, Zionism, as it was reflected on a T-shirt during the Capitol insurrection, somebody wore, or I'm sorry, it was in a different context that somebody wore a T-shirt saying all the isms they're against, and Zionism was right below anti-Semitism, as if, and we don't own the term the way we need to own it, and there is work to be done on campus in that regard. But the other thing I want to validate in what Rachel was saying in terms of education and making sure that both the Jewish community and potential allies are knowledgeable, is that we will only succeed, in our view, and this has been the ADL's position for as long as we've engaged in the dual purpose of fighting both anti-Semitism and all other forms of hate, is that in allyship across different types of hate and different communities, it lies the power to secure the ability to hold people accountable when they cross the line. And I'm not saying that that's where we are right now in a lot of left spaces, and particularly on campus, but there is, in the longer term strategy here, along with the tactics that I heard at the end of the last panel, which I think are critical, there is relationship building to be done. There is outreach to be done. There is education to be done, even as we seek to hold accountable in very specific incidents, people who are over the line, and explain to them or to the administration officials or others who are called upon for accountability. So we have a multi-front challenge here. And I just don't want to lose the fact that we need to operate in several parallel ways and parallel spheres, not necessarily in total lockstep. I know a lot of different organizations have different ways that they approach this. We all come to it with the same intent, which is, how do we combat this re-emerging or newly emerging form of hatred towards Jewish people, and how do we stop this notion that that being Jewish means you're synonymous with every act that Israel commits, that somehow you're responsible for every act that Israel commits, which is in the minds of some of these opponents, the way they approach the world and how they justify their own statements of violence. And that is unacceptable on campus. It is unacceptable anywhere in our society. So we need to work together, to Rachel's point, to understand who understands what. Look at Holocaust denialism, which is a whole nother indicator of the state of the country here. We have a majority of young adults in America who don't know what Auschwitz is. We see a strong and growing prevalence of Holocaust denialism in online content. We saw that 10% of gamers, of young people who play online games, are exposed to Holocaust denialism in the gaming context. What is that about? We need to stop that in the online context wherever it appears. And that's one of the focuses of ADL through our Center on Extremism and our Center on Technology and Society.
And I'll just add something. Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple of quick things, and just want to say that I completely agree. And I'm actually really encouraged to hear, because I'm hearing it more and more and more, and I think it's a good thing. This understanding, as Rachel said, that we've got to humanize these issues, right? They can't just be agenda items, and they can't just be this big issue. I find myself talking to college students all the time about this, that why do we care about racism? Why do we care about sexism? Why should we care about anti-Semitism? It's because it affects people, right? We have to humanize this. And so I think that that's crucial. And I'm so encouraged to hear that's coming. And I'm in the many different ways that I'm involved in combating anti-Semitism, whether it's on campus, whether we're dealing with ICC issues, whatever it is, I'm hearing it more and more, coupled with allyship, right? With finally kind of overcoming, for years, intersectionality has excluded Jews, and particularly pro-Israel Zionist Jews. And I feel like we're in a moment right now where we're trending better in that regard, and we are building allies. And again, and it goes back to, again, something else that Rachel said, like, I just feel like I should have been able to, interject right after each of her bullet points, because I think that one of the things that is starting to gain some momentum in terms of understanding, like, again, like Rachel said, those of us on this call, I think all understand that just like racism is wrong, and just like sexism is wrong, and the other isms are wrong, for some reason anti-Semitism keeps getting a pass. And I say for some reason, I think we know some of the reasons, but continuing to remind and to do it in an educational, persuasive way, again, in a humanizing way, that anti-Semitism deserves no lesser condemnation than any of these other isms, any of these other forms of discrimination. And I think that's starting to gain some momentum in terms of understanding, some traction there. And again, I think it's all kind of happening at the same time, that others are willing to stand with the Jewish community a little bit more, and there's a little more of a sense of importance about allyship, and also about humanizing things. And so I just want to mention a couple of specifics in this regard, in terms of how I'm seeing it happen, especially with regard to combating online anti-Semitism. One of the things that our Florida office just did this, I think it's incredible, and I don't know why we didn't think of it sooner, but sooner or later, creative minds come up with these great ideas. They came up with this campaign in the wake of the Myers-Leonard situation with the Miami Heat, right? And Doron talking about online gaming and being exposed to things. Obviously, I think we're all familiar with the comments that were made, and that was a situation where, at least ostensibly, this individual didn't even know what it was he was saying. He didn't understand the anti-Semitic nature of some of the language. But in the wake of that, our Florida office, our Southeast office, decided to create a mural. And again, it wasn't just focused on anti-Semitism. It was focused on being united against all forms of hate. Anti-Semitism, racism, all forms of hate. And then, and this is where I really think that there's an opportunity for combating online anti-Semitism, and it's through kind of a grassroots effort. The students in that area got really excited about this and said, hey, maybe we can do something more with this, and maybe we can do something online with it. So they created this, it's #DunkOnHate campaign, and it's like the ALS water bucket challenge, right? And it's take a video of yourself dunking a basketball and telling why you stand against whatever form of hate it is, and then challenging 3 other people online to do the same, to kind of create this movement and create awareness. So again, I think that it's a positive way to say, hey, look, this is happening and it's not going anywhere, but we recognize the need to not only bring awareness to it, but to try to bring some positivity and bring people together. Again, in this, it's not just about a Jewish problem. It's not just about a problem for people of color, but when any one of these things is allowed to fester and is fostered within society, it's going to affect all of us. And so I think that is starting to become more of a universal understanding. And again, I that may sound a little overly optimistic, but I'm just seeing more and more traction. And so it encourages me that while yes, the numbers are going up in a negative way in terms of increasing anti-Semitism, I think that people are coming together and finding creative ways to push back and to recognize that anti-Semitism is wrong, just like racism is wrong, just like sexism. So those are the couple of things. The other thing I guess I should add real quickly is, I think another way that's important in the context of fighting online anti-Semitism and humanizing it is when you have some education and you're confronted personally, and I've recently heard stories about individuals who have had some success in just having some one-on-one dialogue because they are armed with some facts, and they're able to have these conversations and be somewhat open-minded and be reasonable and rational. And I'm just hearing more and more stories about people being able to move the needle just a little bit, and like I tell students all the time, if you have an encounter like this and you have a conversation with somebody who, Rachel's talking about the don't knows, if you're talking to somebody who's staunchly in, that camp of being an anti-Semite or anti-Zionist form, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for them, and you get them to walk away from that conversation saying, oh, well, I didn't know that, I'll have to think about that. That's a win. right? That's progress, and it's not all going to happen in a single conversation. And so I'm seeing more and more of this happening too. And so I think that that's another important way, like I said, just dealing with human beings on a human being level, that one-on-one and having these conversations, I feel like is another really important way that we can begin to move this in the right direction.
Sure. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. It's all really important. I think all the work that we're doing. I think one of the challenges, I'm just going to diverge a little bit, is, obviously there's extremism on both sides, on the right and on the left, and it's how do we counter that on campuses, as alumni, et cetera. There's one of the reasons I know that Jews are targeted many times on campus is that we're characterized as white. We're the oppressors. Laurie asked the question, one of our co-founders, maybe we should also be speaking out against other stereotyping of whites as white oppressors as part of our efforts to fight hatred against all groups. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, how do we counter that hatred? Maybe Daron, if you want to kick us off on that.
Sure. I think it's really important, again, to understand dynamics. And I appreciate that, and some folks have shared in the chat their view that perhaps ADL leans one direction or another. I'd love to have the opportunity to demonstrate otherwise, although there's not enough time. But I think we do need to understand what the underlying ideological basis is for opposition to Jews, whether it's on the far left or it's on the far right. And I would argue that there are more similarities than you might think, or for those of us who have done the thinking, we find more similarities than we might suspect. And so what the opportunity is actually for a conversation to demonstrate that the extremism of the right and the growing, what I characterize as absolutism on the left, it bears characteristics that not only target Jews and are rooted in historical tropes about Jewish power and abuse of or murdering of children or financial control, but also are fundamentally anti-democratic. They undermine the notion of democracy that I dare say has provided a degree of security for the Jewish community in this country that is, unprecedented in modern history. And so I think trying to find, it's not to bootstrap, it's not to elevate one over the other qualitatively. They both exist. You should know that in our audit, we found slightly more, we were reported to us were slightly more incidents of campus-related Zionist-oriented anti-Semitism. But it was a matter of 2 percentage points difference between the white supremacy that was reported against Jews on campus, right? So these strains both exist. They're both activated. And interestingly, there's an anti-Israel strain on the far right also and calls for violence and characterizations of Israel and the control by Israel of our own military and the like. And so if we can, as a community, and we've got so much creativity in our community, we have such resource and commitment to the problem, that if we can ourselves look for how do we orient people in the vast middle to understand these problems are of equal concern. They are based equally on untenable constructs that not only are rooted in hate, but are also rooted in a challenge to our democracy. I think therein lies the opportunity for us to emerge, not to conquer all anti-Semitic hate. We have always seen it in this country. We've always seen it in every country. The issue is we want to prevent the mainstreaming of it, right? We want it to prevent it from creeping into, and one of the things that is very troubling, we also do a survey on attitudes towards Jews. And we are really at an unprecedentedly positive time in America about the overall attitude of Americans, non-Jewish Americans, towards Jews. And yet, the majority of Americans still harbor a number of stereotypes or tropes about Jews, and it's even more extreme when we go to Europe and to other countries, Latin America and Asia as well. And so there is still real work to be done. So, my suggestion, my plea even, is that we look for ways in which our alternative worldviews, our alternative beliefs in how we respond do not divide the sharing of perspectives in the alliance of Jewish organizations and Jewish communities against this common challenge, whether it emerges on the far left or on the far right. Because I think if we are set against each other in this process, only the haters win.
Thanks, Daron. I'm curious, Rachel or Carly, if you have any thoughts as well about the extremisms on either side of the aisle, obviously.
I think my first comment would be I'm not sure how extreme they are anymore, meaning the pendulum and the spectrum has shifted. And what we have to realize is that the far right and the far left are much closer towards the middle than to the polar extremes, which should concern everyone on this call, whether you vote Republican or vote Democrat. And that should be a wake-up call for us, meaning when you're on college campus and when we're working with students on college campus, these are not individuals who proclaim to be part of the socialist Marxist movements. They may be. They don't know what they're talking about, by the way, when they say those things. It just sounds intellectually curious to them. But what they actually are doing is saying, well, in order to be part of the litmus test for what makes me progressive, for how I show that I'm for the other, quote unquote, is by demonstrating that I'm anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, that I believe that we need to strengthen the weak and weaken the strong, that I'm anti-racist, and I also will denounce Zionism because it's perceived as being colonialist and imperialist, because we haven't reclaimed what Zionism actually is. And those are not far positions anymore. Those aren't extremes. Those are entering the mainstream discourse. And I will tell you that 20 years ago, when we saw these things happening on campus, people said to me in the Jewish community, what happens on campus stays on campus. Don't worry about it, Rachel. And I would say, this isn't Vegas. What happens on campus goes beyond campus. It enters mainstream politics. It enters the media. It enters the discourse around government, local politics, and policy. And it's absolutely entering educational environments, K through 12. You better believe that this is happening in your kids' elementary school, your grandchildren's elementary school, before they ever set foot on college campus. And that's just from the left. We can equally dissect what's happening on the right. So, because it is in video games, just as Daron said, it is the discourse that enters the waters, that is happening in certain groups, whether it's the African-American community where Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam is still lauded. And we're afraid to find the right people to help be the right messengers because we know that it's a complex conversation and a tenuous relationship with the African-American and Black community. We need Jewish leadership who's not afraid of doing that. So I would say until we start to really, really call it out on both sides and recognize that they're not very far, but they're way much closer together than we would like to see, then we are not actually at all awake and alert to the threats that are facing the Jewish community.
And if I could state in an affirming way what Rachel just said in terms of Israel, I would argue that the threat to Israel is not the individual threat to the student on campus, as painful and as difficult as that might be, and we need to build resilience, but rather it is the formation of cross-cultural coalitions in opposition to Israel. That is what is happening. And the campus is a microcosm of society writ large, but that is not the only front in this particular battle, obviously, in this particular war. And so as much as it impacts us as individuals or our children as individuals, we need to keep our eye on the broader normalization that is occurring of hate on both sides, as Rachel referenced.
Thank you. We are just about out of time, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us and for having this conversation. I think it's a really important one. And I wanted to give the floor to you all one more time to see if you all had any closing remarks you wanted to share with our alumni, who obviously are quite concerned with what's happening on campuses as we evolve from this, COVID pandemic and moving from online back to in real life, how things are will be changing and are changing as quite literally as we speak. I wanted to give you all an opportunity to share some final thoughts with our audience. So maybe Carly, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. I think I just want to echo something that was said at the end of the last panel, which and then combine it with, I think there's very little that you could do that is more important than to continue to educate yourself about what's happening. And again, obviously that's why you're here. You're here to educate yourselves, to hear from those of us who are on the campus, working on the campus, working, with these students and with these organizations, about what is it that's actually happening on the campuses, and then what are the resources that are available. And so again, I commend you for doing that, but also to then take that information and educate those that are within your sphere of influence about these things, because as alums, you do have, we all do, we have power. And I realize it may be kind of slow going sometimes seeing that work itself out. But again, this is one of the things that I'm hearing more and more about alums who have the ears of administrators, of those with the direct authority on campuses in particular. And so the more educated you are about what's happening, about what the resources are, it was mentioned, I think, during the last panel, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and how important it is to get the word out about that definition and why it's so important. Not just what it is, but how it can be utilized, but the accurate information, because there's like everything else in this sphere. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I didn't think that I was going to be in this field dealing with the Holocaust as a controversial matter. How controversial is history? Apparently this is a really controversial matter right now. Why is a definition of anti-Semitism so controversial? I mean, I know some of the answers as to why people are trying to make a controversy out of this, but educating ourselves about the tools that really will help to combat some of this, because again, a lot of what we see on campuses is not just what's happening, but it's the inability largely of those who are in positions of authority to identify it as anti-Semitism. Rachel's talking about how this demographic, 13 to 35 doesn't even know what the word means. And I would venture to say that a lot of administrators, even if they think they do, they don't really understand what anti-Semitism looks like, and what it means. They don't understand, as Rachel said, we're trying to reclaim the term Zionism and help others to understand what all that encompasses, right? It's not just this or just that. We have a tendency to focus on single manifestations of Zionism without understanding that it's a much broader concept. And so again, helping administrators and those student leaders to understand that. And I think that the IHRA definition is a really crucial tool in doing that. So again, I would just say that that's one of the things, one of the positives I would say that's come out of this pandemic, at least for me, for what I do, is I can reach more people. And more often, right? I don't have to get on an airplane and travel to be in front of people. Don't get me wrong, I miss that. And I think that dynamic is really important. And I look forward to that happening again. But for the time being, I can reach a larger audience about, with this information. And then the hope and the goal is that that you guys, as you get that education, you take that and you educate those who are within your sphere of influence about these things, to help push back and to help, again, I feel like I'm just parroting what Rachel's saying, but I just agree with it. Being able to empower students on campus to be able to deal with and address these things, to again, make sure that they can provide some of this information and this education. Again, I think those are the things that are really crucial right now for alums to really be focusing on.
I just want to add one thing, Abby, and then I'm happy to sign off. It is really important for all alumni to recognize that it's not just about the current students. We all care about students, but the alumni on this call have the ability to ask the questions of the university about faculty issues, funding issues, and administration issues. And you have more power to do that than the student has. And you can hold the university more accountable than a student can in the current moment if you ask the questions about who funds the Middle East Studies Department, who's funding the Arab Studies program, where does Muslim Student Association get its money, where are the faculty that are most vocal who are supportive of BDS, where are the faculty who are silent, countering BDS, why? What is the university administration's responsibility in order to address these issues? Can they stop hiding behind academic freedom and political freedom of speech in order to actually be responsible administrators and gain the necessary education that sensitizes them to understand the complexities of Judaism, Jews, and Zionism? So it's up to you all to make sure you are asking those questions. Do not hold these students on campus responsible for that. That's our job.
And I don't want to, Duran, I don't want to speak over you, but I do want to just say again, to Rachel's point, if that's information that you're willing to take the initiative to try to get, and you can't get it, and you're dealing with a public entity, we can help you get that information through public records requests. So there are tools, again, I just want to make sure people know that there are tools available to get that information if a simple ask doesn't get you there.
And I'll just finish by saying equally, the basic education of what is anti-Semitism, what is anti-Zionism, what are the concerns? Those materials also exist to help you get educated and to offer students that education, administrators and others in coalition. And I recommend to you a resource we put out last year called Anti-Semitism Uncovered, which is really an in-depth historical look at the 7 tropes that are consistent through in anti-Semitism, including anti-Israel rhetoric. With suggestions on how we can tie and demonstrate for people why what is happening on campus in so many spaces is unacceptable and belongs in the Rubicon of unacceptable hate, if you will, and needs to be opposed by administrators with the same vigor that other forms of hate is opposed. And thank you for the time, and it's been a pleasure.
We're seeing a drastic rise in anti-Semitism on far too many campuses.
Students on campus were petrified to openly support Israel.
Alums for Campus Fairness is called that because we're searching for an open and fair dialogue. I love you.
We are unifying the voices of alumni who care about their schools.
It's more important today than ever before to support the students on the ground. The rising tide of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric is stronger than we've ever seen before. Great, thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Nate Miller and Noah Tishby. Nate, if you can start us off and get us going.
Thank you so much, Avi. Thank you, Joel. Great to see so many committed alumni and so many friends on this call. And I'm really couldn't be more thrilled to be moderating this conversation with a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, and really one of I think the most effective and tenacious and passionate advocates for the state of Israel and the Jewish people that we have on our team, and really a treasure. And she's been out spreading, really telling a story that's very compelling from a unique perspective. And I'm excited to get into it with Noah and talk a bit about her book. For those of you who don't know her, though, I just want to give you a little background. Noah Tishby is an actress, producer, writer, and activist. She was born and raised in Tel Aviv and served 2.5 years in the Israeli army before she landed a starring role on the nation's highest rated primetime drama, Ramat Aviv Gammel. She became a household name in Israel, appearing in numerous TV shows, films, theater productions, and national fashion campaigns before she moved to LA, where she sold the Israeli TV show In Treatment to HBO, making history as the first television show, the first Israeli television show to become an American series. Noah's co-produced over 150 episodes, which earned a Peabody Award and 12 Emmy and Golden Globe nominations. In Treatment's now back in production at HBO for its 4th season. Noah's a passionate political activist. She founded a nonprofit called Act for Israel, which was Israel's first online advocacy organization, has become widely known as Israel's unofficial ambassador. And most recently, she's the author of Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, which was published this past April by Simon & Schuster. So I want to get right into it. Noah, tell us why you wrote the book and why you saw the need for a book like that. And I'm sorry, if I could ask everybody, if you're not speaking, to please mute. Thank you so much.
Zoom life. Hi, everybody. Zoom life. It's okay. If you hear my dog whining or my son coming in the room, I apologize in advance. So it's literally the answer that I tell everybody because it's the truth. The reason I wrote the book is because I needed the book. I needed this book. I know how we all find ourselves in situations in which we have to explain Israel. We have to defend Israel. We hear this lies / misinformation / disinformation / slander about Israel. And sometimes we're like, no, but that's not that. First of all, that's not how it went down. Second, that's not true. And we find ourselves like lost for words, can't explain what the country is about, why it needs to be there, why it needs to be secure, why it needs to be safe, why it's not just important for the Jewish people, it's important for non-Jewish people, for Western society. And I couldn't find, I had friends and people I was working with that were asking me for a book. Like, is there a book I can read? Is there something I can read? And the truth was that a lot of the material about Israel is very brainy and very studious and very historically heavy and very deep. And it's material that I would read, that I'm sure a lot of us on the call would read, people that are fascinated by the subject would read, but the majority of the world won't. And I knew that a lot of my friends won't. And I was able throughout the years, with my years of advocacy, I was able to find a way to explain to people what is Israel about in a very quick and easy to understand way. And I knew that there isn't a book like that. So at some point I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna write it. It just doesn't exist. I'm gonna write it. So that's why I wrote it. It was, I needed help. I needed something to be like, give to people and be like, let's read this first, then we'll have a conversation, and give them something that they actually would read.
Having read the book, I can say that, my background, I was
the first.
I got it before it was published. I got it
printed. You got it on PDF.
Yeah, which I want to get that signed. Maybe I'll turn it into an NFT or something. But I'm really, it's a tremendous. I have to say, I've been in this business almost as long as you have, Noah. I was at the UN for 3 years as the chief speechwriter there, and struggled often, to think about how do you tell Israel's story in a way that's compelling, that the man on the street, our mutual friend and one of my mentors, Ron Prosor, often said, if the guy who's picking up the garbage in the morning can't understand what we're saying, we're not saying it in the right way. And that's what struck me so powerfully in reading the book. Talk to, and this is a group, of advocates, of people who are very connected to this issue, care a lot. What are some of your lessons that you try to step out as really being a strategist, and how do you think about communicating in a way that people are going to be able to hear the message you're trying to deliver? How do you do it?
So there are a couple of things. First of all, in terms of communicating, I think the medium is the message in a way. And I made sure that the book is read, it's conversational, it's tongue in cheek, it's irreverent, it's sometimes funny. I like taking the piss at myself. I love self-deprecating humor. So it's, in terms of the language and how I communicate the story, I just talk. I'm not talking above people's heads. I can do it. I choose not to. I'm like, let me just communicate it to you in a way that you can understand it. In terms of the message, what I found throughout the years is that we sometimes assume that people know more than they do. And we assume that they know more than they do. And we kind of skip a few key issues. And it's not for every situation, right? If you have a child or a grandchild in college, they can't be like, oh, 2,500 years ago, this and that happened. But I realized that when I would sit down with people and explain to them the rundown of history, right? Let's talk about the last 2,500 years. Let's talk about, so there's a lot of truths that have become a lot of fake news that became real in terms of BDS movement or whatever. By the way, my son is not interrupting, but my dog is.
One thing,
it's whining. This is just this is comical. This Zoom life, promoting a book on Zoom is comical.
At least he didn't do it when you were on the View, Noah. That's all I can say.
I know. Oh my God, they were out of the house in the crate. I mean, my child was at school. My dog was in the crate. But anyway, so I made sure that if you confront somebody at a dinner party, you need to know to answer to whatever it is that they're telling you. So to listen what it is the complaint is and answer the complaint head on. But when writing the book, it was important for me to explain to people the background and the history. So if you read through BDS website, they say stuff like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, Israel invaded Palestine and deported 7.3 million people. So first of all, 7.3 million, where did you get that number from? Number one. Number two, that whole notion of Israel invading a state and dismantling another state is something that isn't true. Obviously, we know this. So in the book, it was important for me to go back and make it fun and make it relatable. But like, let's go back in history for a second. Let's talk about, I have a subchapter, which is like literally less than 1,000 words, in which I run down history. What had happened since the last day of the Jewish diaspora and all the way to today. And then you kind of understand that there wasn't, that piece of land was swapped hand, and it was only like a sovereign Jewish state throughout history. So stuff like that is important to kind of point out the facts, do them in a way that's fun and lighthearted, right? But do it clearly, super accurately, so you have like a meta conversation and explanation about how we got to where we got to. So these two things are very important, like a conversational language and accuracy in terms of facts, but also giving them to people because people don't know. They just don't know. They don't know the history. They don't know the difference between Hamas and the PA. They don't know the borders. They just don't know.
By the way,
to do that.
I've spent the last 15 years talking to reporters about Israel, and these are educated people. And I am always shocked by exactly what you said, how little they know.
They don't.
And how often we have to really go back into really basic rudimentary things to help people understand. They don't know anything about its political system. They don't know anything about its government. They don't know anything about its history. They don't know anything about the Palestinians. It's all very.
But they have a lot of opinions.
That's right. They have a lot of opinions. They've read they've seen a CNN story, but they haven't actually dealt. And I think one of as advocates, like just demonstrating that knowledge with folks is a good way to help them understand, well, maybe this is more complicated than I think.
Yeah.
I want to get to a really specific thing, because this group is engaged on campus, as alumni, in some cases as students. Obviously, that's a very specific context. Noah, you are a loud and proud progressive, which I think is part of the reason why you're such an effective advocate.
I would say liberal, because now like saying progressives, that's like, okay. I'm nowhere near the squad.
Right. So you're a loud and proud liberal, and you have some deep friendships with elected officials like Richie Torres and other people who are definitely on the left side. And so I'm wondering if you have advice for how this group can help to win the argument or engage in the debate on campus, where it's in more of a, on the left side of the political spectrum in terms of that.
Yeah. So first of all, in terms of Israeli politics, I've never endorsed anybody. I've never said pro or con any politician, anything. I make sure that I stay above the fray that way and don't align myself with any political party in the US or personality in Israel. In the US, I'm a proud registered independent. I specifically don't align myself with a party because I'm all about values and issues and policies, right? So I'm very liberal in terms of every single social thing you can imagine, but like strong on the fence. So I would say I'm a common sense voter, right? Like you can't be crazy on this side or on that side. Like nothing is that black and white. So that's important to kind of know.
To clarify, so thank you.
Yeah. Just because I just think that like both the extreme left and the extreme right they're going crazy. So, we have to make sure that the majority of the American people, the majority of us, our voices are heard, like common sense, normal centric, let's make a deal type of thing and make things happen. So that's number one. But the thing is this, right? There's no doubt to all of us that are in this world that if you are a liberal, you need to support Israel within the context of the Middle East. Like if you love democracy, why would you align yourself with failed states, Sharia states, Islamist regimes, autocratic, kleptocrat? Like why would you align yourself with those regimes? And the thing that have started kind of shaping up in the left is instead of empowering the Palestinians for strong leadership, for more financial investments, like for anything that would empower them to make good choices for themselves. It's all about bashing Israel. And when you bash Israel, it's then being used by forces that don't want Israel to be around. And we know what had happened. So it's important for me. First of all, I wrote this book for college kids. Specifically, I had like the 18 to 35 kind of frame in my mind of like that. I've realized now that it skews, actually it's a little wider than I thought, but those were my friends, like people that I hung out with throughout the years that are liberal, that are active on campuses in these liberal groups and organizations, and are being shunned out because they either need to denounce Israel or not speak about it. And I'm like, wait, you guys are wrong. Like there's nothing, like you guys are wrong. Like it's not, people ask me like, how are you so brave to take this position? And I'm like, I'm not brave to take a position that's right. Like you have no idea what you're supporting on the other side. Like you have no idea who's paying for BDS. You don't even understand what it is that they want, because otherwise Sarah Silverman wouldn't have said like, yes, I'm for BDS. I'm like, no, you're not. But like what BDS is doing, as we all know, is they're cloaking their dagger. They're hiding what it is that they're actually about. And they're using all this woke language of justice and freedom and equality. And I'm like, no. You want a country that exists to not exist. And that's fine if you do, by the way. It's America. It's free speech, right? But what you've been doing is lying to liberals. That's why you're able to attract so many of them, and so many from the Jewish community too. So that to me is something that needs to be strongly communicated. I had in mind literally giving ammunition to anybody who's pro-Israel, whether they're a liberal, a progressive, a conservative, whatever, just to as I say in the book, arm yourself with facts and go get yourself in good trouble.
It's really, really powerful. I'm going to encourage everyone on this call to read this book. I think it's both very easy to read and, very powerful to use as a tool for each and every one of us who are engaged in this fight. And I think Noah, on behalf of the whole Jewish community, and particularly Lobster Campus Fearless, I just want to thank you for writing it, because I and being out there and being in this fight in such a public and passionate way, because we need advocates like you who are on the front lines and who are willing to stand up and say this is important.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Noah. I also want to give a special shout out and thank you for it. I hear you on Clubhouse regularly. So thank you for all the conversations that you have and contribute to. I also want to share with everyone that after the conference, we're going to send out a follow-up email with a survey, but also with a form for you to fill out your address, because everyone here is going to be able to get a copy of your new book. So we're thrilled to be able to share that with everyone, and be on the lookout tomorrow for the follow-up and for us to be able to ship a book right to your door. So we're thrilled to be able to share that. And thank you so much, Noah, for being here. Really appreciate it. Alums for Campus Fairness is thankful. And thank you, Nate, for facilitating and for helping us in the conversation.
Thank you, Avi.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So I want to move on to our final keynote speaker of the evening. And we are thrilled and honored to have with us Deborah Lipstock. And Deborah, I just added you to the screen. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here and being with us. Deborah is the DeRote Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University. She is that's my daughter coming through. She is the author of several award-winning books, including Anti-Semitism Here and Now, a National Book Award winner, History on Trial, My Day in Court with David Irving, a National Jewish Book Award winner, Denying the Holocaust, Growing the Assault on Truth and Memory, and Beyond Belief. Lipstock is frequently quoted in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Forward, Tablet. She regularly appears on BBC, CNN, NPR, and PBS, among many others. Deborah currently lives in Atlanta, and we are honored to be able to have you with us and for you to address alums for campus fairness on anti-Semitism. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Deborah. So Deborah, please take it away.
Okay. Thank you all very much. It's really a pleasure being here. I enjoyed listening to Noah. I read the interview with her. I think it was in Variety. So I'm looking forward to getting the book. Do I get the book too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. In any case.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. In any case, I haven't heard the earlier speakers. I just came on. I listened to the interview with Noah. So forgive me if I am repeating some of the things that were said, but sometimes as a teacher, I find it's good to repeat because then listeners get reinforced, the information is reinforced in their mind, and or they feel really smart. Hey, I know that. So when we talk about anti-Semitism, I'm going to step back, and instead of talking about issues, which I think you've been doing for a good part of this session, I want to give you a structural way of thinking about anti-Semitism. What is it? How do we understand it? Anti-Semitism is a prejudice, like other prejudices, like racism, homophobia, sexism, prejudge. I made up my mind. Don't confuse me with the facts. So that it's irrational. A prejudice, all prejudices are irrational. You assume everybody in the group is exactly the same. You assume there is no variation, and you don't have to know the person. I see the person either by the color of their skin, whether they're wearing a kippah, where they've got tzitzis hanging out, whether they're wearing a Jewish star, which I've begun to wear in the past year because I didn't want to pass anymore. And then I assume I know who they are, and I know what they are, I know what they believe, and I know how they will behave. So in that sense, anti-Semitism is a prejudice like other prejudices. Now, how is it different? I think it has some distinct elements which bear extrapolating, because they're going to help you understand what it is you're fighting in whatever form it might come. So first of all, let's contrast anti-Semitism with, let's say, racism. Every prejudice, going back now talking about all prejudice, every prejudice has a template of stereotypes. You can't take one stereotype and put it on another group, even if you hate both groups, because it won't work. For instance, stereotypes about African-American, prejudicial stereotypes. I'm not talking about truth, I'm talking about prejudicial stereotypes. What are some of the prejudicial stereotypes? Well, the words that we often find used are shiftless, lazy, welfare, thugs, and other equally disturbing words, assuming everybody is like that, assuming that there are no other groups with people who are shiftless and lazy. That's the template of stereotypes associated with racism. What's the template of stereotypes associated with anti-Semitism? Well, I like to identify four, maybe others, but I think four major ones. First of all, something to do with money, with financial power. Jews are rich, Jews are controlling, Jews have financial abilities, etc., beyond what others have. A. B, smart, but not smart. You say, oh, that person is really smart. When you're talking about, when you're using it within the context of the anti-Semitic stereotype, you're not talking affirmatively. You're saying things like clever, conniving, crafty. I always say there may be something about the hard C sound, but in other words, smarts that they use in a malicious fashion for their own advancement, for their own good. And not only for their own good, but crafty, for their own good and to everybody else's detriment. They are not only looking only for themselves, you know, it's ironic, it may not neely mealy, but the other half, if I'm only for myself, what am I? But if I'm not for myself, who's going to be for me? But the other half is, if I'm only for myself, what am I? But that doesn't matter. They assume that all Jews are only for themselves and for other Jews, and they are working to hurt others. The third stereotype, or the third part of that template, the third element I would add, and they all relate one to the other, is what I call punching above their weight. Small in number, but able to accomplish things which sort of belie the smallness of the few that they are. Think back to one of the most all-enduring anti-Semitic phony, I mean, it's a phony book, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which purports to be, it is not, purports to be the deliberations, the protocols, the minutes of meetings of elders of Zion, a small group, remember, small in number, sitting around deciding how they're going to control the world's economy. The truth of the matter is a little historical background. That book appeared in, I think, the 1860s, 70s initially, had nothing to do with Jews, nothing to do with Jews. Was taken probably by the Tsarist police towards the end of the 19th century. Jews were put into it, injected, add Jews as evil, and then it became the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But in other words, so they're small in number, but they're able to punch above their weight. That, by the way, is one of the reasons why when involved Jews and Jews who were aware of these stereotypes and aware of these ways in which they used against Jews, hear terms like the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby, we react, we get our hackles on, we react, we're bothered by it in a way that people who grow tobacco may not react when they hear about the tobacco lobby, or people who make steel may not react when they hear about the steel lobby, because we know that the implication is, oh, those Jews, small in number, but bring 6,000 Jews to an AIPAC meeting, they're going to turn this whole country upside down, turn this whole city upside down, turn this whole Congress and White House upside down to their own interests. And the final element of this template of anti-Semitism that I would add is the Jew as devil. Now, what do I mean by that? That sounds sort of murky and whatever. Remember that anti-Semitism has its roots in Christian theology. I'm not saying all Christians are anti-Semites. I'm not saying all Christian theology had to be anti-Semitic, but it was used that way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the devil in Christian theology had two characteristics. One, the devil was the only one who could harm God, and know that in the New Testament is essentially a conversation amongst Jews. Everybody in the book is Jewish except for the Romans who actually killed Jesus, but it's used later by Rome as a way of furthering Christianity and inculcating hatred towards those who remain Jews. But in any case, the devil can harm very powerful beings, A, and B, the other characteristic of the devil is the devil does his work in disguise. You don't know you've been attacked by the devil till the devil has come and gone. Now, some of you may be sitting here thinking, why is she talking about the devil? Because even today, as anti-Semitism moved out of a theological framework and moved into secular circles and moved into anti-religious circles, not just secular, but Haredi, atheist circles, of fundamental haters of religion, Karl Marx, it took those stereotypes with them, cleaned them, denuded them of religious elements. So killing of Jesus had nothing to do one thing or the other, but left financial, Rothschilds controlled the banks, left craftiness of Jews, left punching above their weight, and left the devil element too. Today, sometimes you'll hear the name George Soros thrown about. I don't care what you think about George Soros, his politics, his money. When his name is used, in a political way, in this kind of way, it is a code for Jews. And they're working behind the scenes. They're doing this behind the scenes. So that's, and I'm going to get to more of that in a minute. So that's the template of anti-Semitic charges. Now I want to go back to working within the construct of prejudice in general, and especially doing this contrast. So let's say again, let's go back to this contrast because it's so much in the news today of anti-Semitism with racism. As I say, they're both prejudices. I started by making that point, but there's something significantly different and unique about anti-Semitism as compared to other prejudices. When you're talking about racism, the racist, and usually the racist and the anti-Semite are one and the same. The racist looks at the person of color, Black person, brown person, and says, they're not as smart as I am. They're not as capable as I am. They're not as accomplished as I am. If they move into our neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood. If their kids go to our kids' school, there goes the school. In other words, the racist punches down. But when they deal with Jews, it flips around. They loathe the person of color, the racist loathe. And the racist, as I say, and the anti-Semite are generally one and the same. But when they look at Jews, they say, aha, the Jew is richer than, smarter than, more powerful than I am. More able to work in subterranean and subterfuge, etc. The Jew, I not only loathe the Jew, but I fear the Jew for what they might do to me. So the anti-Semite punches up. Okay, so you've got punching down, punching up, and that makes a very big difference. So that's one distinctive element about anti-Semitism. The other distinctive element, and it's very relevant to today, is, and it's implicit in the stereotypes that I was giving to you a moment ago, is the conspiracy. That Jews are involved in this conspiracy. Remember, planning, conniving, protocols of the elders of Zion. They're involved in a conspiracy to harm the non-Jew and advance themselves. They are a conspiratorial group. Now, generally, most anti-Semitic charges, whether it's in the Middle Ages, the poisoning of the wells, or it's the bubonic plague, or it's the Great Fire in London, whatever it might be, you had very often it was the Jew who was behind it, because you already had a centuries-old animosity towards the Jew, so it was very easy to plug the Jew right in. Today we have something new, where conspiracy theories abound all over. I mean, there's been so much written about them, whether it's QAnon or whatever one is addicted to on the internet. And the person who is attracted to conspiracy theories and beguiled by conspiracy theories then looks, well, who could be behind this? Who could be doing this? Well, there's one group that for millennia, since the beginning of the Common Era, for over 2,000 years, has been involved in conspiracy, whether 2,000 years ago it was trying to kill Jesus, whether 600 years ago it was trying to spread the bubonic plague, whether it was trying to burn down London, whether it was trying to get control of the banks, whatever it might be, trying to create a communist revolution to take over the world. Who is that group? The Jews. So in other words, not every conspiracy theorist will go to the Jews, but many will, even if they don't start out looking for the Jews, because it's such a convenient target to plug right in. Of course, the charges are absurd and make no sense, but it's very hard. This is one of the reasons why it is so hard to fight anti-Semitism, because how do you fight something that's absurd? How do you fight something that's illogical? How do you fight something that's delusional? Think about the charges. Jews are all communists. They're all lefties. They want to take over the society and bring in communism, socialism, whatever it is they want to do. Jews are all capitalists. They want to control the banks. Jews are pushy. They're always trying to get into clubs they don't belong to, fraternities they don't belong with, that don't want them, dorms that don't want the Jew, et cetera, neighborhoods that don't want Jews. Or Jews are clannish. They stick together. They're not interested in mixing it up with other people. Well, last time I checked, it's impossible to be a communist and a capitalist, clannish and pushy at the same time. It's contradictory, but that doesn't matter to the anti-Semite. It's part and parcel. The point I want to make next, and I'm not sure, are we gonna have time for questions? Should I allow some time for questions, or are we just doing this?
Yeah, we have some time for a couple of questions, but you can still continue right now.
Yeah, I've got more to say. I could go,
Good.
So recently I was talking to my class, and one of the students says, Professor Lipstock, you're muted. I said, that doesn't happen very often, It's not usually one of my problems. So think back to Charlottesville. Think back to that awful weekend in August 3 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. Remember the rally, you've seen the videos, you can go online and see them, when these guys who've come for a Unite the Right rally. This was a unique rally. This wasn't just a rally of far right, white supremacist, white nationalists. This was to bring together under one umbrella all these different groups. And there were two things that these two groups shared: a deep-seated racism and a deep-seated anti-Semitism. And they weren't two coterminous things, they're linked together. So remember the rally on Friday night? Some of us watched it live, some of us watched it afterwards when it was broadcast. When they're marching across the campus of the University of Virginia with the tiki torches, what are they chanting? Anybody remember what they're chanting? They're chanting, "Jews will not replace us." What did they mean by that? Well, on the far right, we have anti-Semitism on the right, we have anti-Semitism on the left. On the far right, I'm using the terms white supremacist, white nationalist, white power interchangeably, even though they are somewhat different. But I think for the sake of our conversation tonight, I'm going to use them interchangeably. I acknowledge that. What were they saying by Jews? What did they mean by that? Well, on the far right, there is a theory called, it's called by different names: white genocide replacement theory, white genocide theory, white Christian genocide theory. And basically it dates back, some people have dated it back to more recent years, to France, but the truth is it really dates back to a book by a guy named William Pierce called The Turner Diaries. And it was written, he wrote it in the 70s. And he was an overt, blazing anti-Semite and blazing racist. And he looked out on the world and he saw the civil rights legislation that had passed, and advancements, structural advancements and other things being achieved by people of color in this country. And he said, and I remember my punch down, punch up differentiation. He said, Blacks are achieving a lot. They're making a lot of headways. They're not smart enough. They're not talented enough to be able to be doing this on their own. There has to be someone behind the scenes manipulating this, helping them achieve this. They are the puppets. There has to be a puppeteer manipulating them for the puppeteer's own advantage. In other words, the puppeteer doesn't care about Black people and their advantage, but the puppeteer is using this because they have a secret objective which they are trying to achieve. They are involved in a conspiracy against whom? Against Christianity and against white people, because they're not really white. So when they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us," this was where their racism and their anti-Semitism came one and the same. And even when you saw the same theory when a couple of years ago, and it's been off and on, and this country continues, you saw an influx into Europe of refugees, immigrants, call it what you may, from Africa, from North Africa, from the Middle East. and people talk swarms, hordes, whatever words they use. But there too, they said, oh, these people, they're not talented enough. They're not smart enough to be able to come into Europe like that. There's somebody manipulating it. And that's where you often heard the name George Soros. That George Soros is like the Rothschild of the 21st century. So that they're trying to do this. So that's what we see on the far right. What we see on the far left, and I know was talking about it to some degree, is often the anti-Semitism parading as an interest in Israel, a criticism of Israel. And as we all know, and I think Noah would probably agree with me, criticism of Israeli policies is not anti-Semitism. You want to hear criticism of Israeli policies? Go sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv, or better yet, go to Jerusalem to the Knesset. And it's the only democracy in the Middle East. You'll hear one party criticizing the policies of another party. You'll hear it, and you have to listen very hard. They're yelling, they're screaming, and they're talking Israel. They're talking in Hebrew at a mile a minute. My Hebrew is pretty good. I need someone translating for me because it's just, you can't even keep up with it. But when you get a singling out of Israel to the isolation of all other groups, Israel's the only one responsible. Israel's the only wrongdoer in the entire world, much less in the entire Middle East. I was once, not long ago, I write about this in my book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, which I also wrote in many ways for young people. It's written as a series of letters, a conversation between me and a student and a colleague. So it's very campus oriented. But I write about this incident of having been in a town. I was in a university town for a conference. I was free in the evening. I was staying near the campus. I saw there was going to be a lecture on Israel. I said, this will be interesting. Maybe I'll go listen to it. And I came, and of course, it was not surprisingly, sadly, it was a virulently anti-Israel lecture. And afterwards, people were standing around in the anteroom. I was in the antechamber outside, entry hall, and I didn't know anybody, so I was going to leave pretty soon after I got there. But I walked past, and people were chatting one with the other. Somebody said, well, Israel was founded on a evil, and therefore doesn't have a right to exist. So my ears perked up, and nobody knew who I was. And I said, oh, what do you mean by that? I don't understand. He said, well, they came and they threw out all the Palestinians who lived there. They displaced them. There was an indigenous people there, and they got rid of them. And therefore, it has no right to exist. So I said, oh, I'm a historian. I study history. So I want to set your statement in a broader context. Let's assume that's correct. Not entirely correct, and Noah was making that point earlier. But let's assume that's correct. I said, let's think of other countries that maybe have a similar charge in their founding history. And let's start with the United States of America and the treatment of indigenous people here, or slavery. Or let's talk about Canada and the treatment of what Canadians call the First Nation, which people talk about the horrific treatment there. Or let's talk about Australia and the treatment of the Aborigines. Or let's talk about New Zealand and the treatment of the Maoris. I didn't say China and the treatment of the Ungars, the Muslims, or Myanmar and the treatment of the Rohingya. I wanted to talk about countries with which people in the Western world sort of identify and look upon as bastions of liberal democratic values. I said, oh, let's look most of all at the British Empire, where they went into every country and sometimes enslaved and sometimes just took over the indigenous people. Do those countries not have a right to exist? In other words, you can be critical of, and every country has things that you can be critical. I can be critical of Guantanamo or whatever. I can be critical of certain policies, and it doesn't make me anti-American. But to single out Israel in this way, I say, I got to ask why you're doing it. I got to ask why you make this one choice to the exception of all the others. So let me just get one thing about anti-Semitism on the left. I sort of meandered into discussion of Israel, but we've got the white replacement, white Christian genocide theory on the right. What do we have on the left? On the left, we have something a little different. The same template of charges: money, power, conniving, and applied directly to Israel, Israel working behind the scenes, controlling who's ever in the White House or whatever it might be. But on the left, the theory works a little differently. On the left, the Jew is considered white, whereas on the far, far right, the Jew is not considered white. I'm talking about extremes now. I'm not talking about center and different basic accepted differences of approaches. So there, the Jew is considered white. The Jew is considered privileged. All Jews are rich. Remember my template of stereotypes. The Jew is considered powerful. Ipso facto, says the person on the far right. We saw this very clearly. We saw this in the British Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. If the Jew is white, and if the Jew is wealthy, and if the Jew is privileged, ipso facto, they can't be victims of prejudice. It's impossible. A victim of prejudice is not someone who is wealthy, and not someone who is privileged, and not someone who is white. And, says the person on the far left, the added element, and I call this the Miss Piggy defense, and they say, and moi, me, remember Miss Piggy, moi, me, I am a liberal. I was raised on liberal values. I imbibed liberal values with my mother's milk. It's impossible for me to be prejudiced. Therefore, if you, Jew, can't be a victim, and I, person of the far left, can't be a perpetrator of prejudice, therefore, the anti-Semitism you're talking about doesn't exist. You're making this up. You're making this up with another objective: to cover up for the sins of Israel, to cover up for the wrongs of Jews, whatever it might be, whatever charge you make. So that's what we have on the far left, and that's what we have on the far right. It comes from both directions. And I, for one, am an equal opportunity critic. I have friends on the right, I have friends on the left. My friends on the right very astutely can identify, and correctly, absolutely 110% correctly, identify anti-Semitism on the left, and they're spot on. I have friends on the left who very astutely can identify anti-Semitism on the right. What they don't do is identify the anti-Semitism in the camp in which they are located themselves, in the group with which they identify on other issues, and the group with which they have the most street cred, if you still say that, the street credibility. When people do that, when someone on the left can only see anti-Semitism right, doesn't see it right next to them, and vice versa, that when I say, you're not interested in fighting anti-Semitism, you're interested in making political advances for your own sides. I am going to fight it no matter where I see it, who it's coming from my good friend who's going to make an anti-Semitic crack, or someone with whom I disagree 150% on every policy thing. And I think that's how we have to behave. It can't be a smokescreen for achieving other political goals. It's got to be a fight against Jew hatred. The final point I want to make is we did achieve a small, very small, slight, but when you're in this business, you like even small victories this week. One is that the AP, the Associated Press, and any of you who are campus editors or were editors, or even in business and law firms and corporations, you know that the AP style sheet is the Torah for copy editors. If they don't know whether are we capitalizing Black or lowercase, are we capitalizing communism or lowercase, capital, etc., you look in the AP style sheet, and that always gives you cover. You say, we're going according to the AP style sheet. Once they change, we change. So exactly a little less than a week ago, the AP style sheet announced that it was changing something for which I've been battling a long time. They didn't do it simply because of me, but it was something that I was part of a megaphone of a lot of people saying this. They dropped the hyphen from anti-Semitism, as I think you do as well. Because with the hyphen, it looks like you're against something called Semitism. There is no such thing called Semitism. There are people who speak Semitic languages. That's true. That's like the people who speak Romance languages, people who speak Slavic languages. But there's no such thing as Semites. You put a Jew from Ethiopia, and a Jew from Russia, and a Jew from Harbin, and a Jew from New York together. They're all Jews. They look entirely different. There's no such thing as a Semitic people. But with the hyphen, what often happened is you had people who would say, well, I'm a Semite. I'm from the Middle East. I'm a Semite. So anti-Semitism should also be about hatred of people from, speak of Arabs or Palestinians. And it's not. The word in its origins, invented in Vienna in the 19th century, meant Jew hatred. When it was originally written, I have this in my book, it was written as one word, anti-Semitismus. When the guy's article, Wilhelm Marr, he was a journalist, when his articles were translated into English, I guess it was some printer. They used to set type, that's what we call typeface, typesetting, was setting the type, and he saw this word in German. And when it was being translated into English, he put in a hyphen because it was anti-Semitism. You can be immigration, you can be anti-taxation, you can be even anti-vaccination, though I don't know why anybody in their right mind would be, but that's for another conversation. But the thing on the other side of the hyphen stands alone. This is not, anti-Semitism does not mean against being Semitism. It means one thing and one thing only: hating Jews because they are Jews. So AP got rid of the hyphen, and then another thing that I've been arguing for, they're going to spell it with a lowercase. And my argument is, I don't know what their rationale was. My argument is anything that is so delusional, is so absurd, and has caused such damage to so many people and continues to cause such damage doesn't deserve an uppercase letter. So on that small matter, we achieved a victory, and we achieved a relative victory. And with this, I'll close, in the President of the United States recognizing the Armenian genocide. Hitler is purported to have said in 1939, when he was beginning to think about the idea of a genocide against the Jews, of the possibility of a genocide against the Jews, who today speaks of the Armenians? No one. This was the Armenian genocide, less than 3 decades before, 24 years before. Who knows of it? Who speaks of it? In other words, we'll do this to the Jews. Who's going to remember? Who's going to speak about it? Who's going to be upset by it? So, and if you want to know what was the prototype for Holocaust denial, look at Turkish genocide denial. So those two things. Now, some people, as I wrote in the forwards just yesterday, some people may dismiss them. It's a matter of words, a style sheet. We know it was a genocide, calling it genocide, but and this is a message I want you to take away, if anything you take away from this talk this evening, there is no genocide that didn't begin with words. Words of hate need not necessarily lead to a genocide, but think about it. The Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, Rwanda genocide, Sarajevo, Srebrenica, they all began with words. Words count. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Deborah. That was very powerful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We have a few minutes, and if I may, I wanted to ask you directly about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, International Holocaust Remembrance Association. It's something that we've advocated for on campuses for like universities to do it. I've even heard of Rachel Fish, who spoke with us earlier, she was working with football teams to even adopt it. And I think it's, a former player in the Miami Heat said a derogatory term while he was playing video games. He then got cut by the Heat. He then got traded by the Heat to the Thunder, and then they cut him. So obviously words matter, to your point. But I think even more important is defining it, and something that that we've endorsed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah. First of all, that player, but then something very wonderful happened with that player. I'm blocking his name, and I'm sure half of your entire audience is yelling who his name is at the screen.
Myers Leonard.
There you go. Right. Some people reached out to him and began to educate him and talk about, hey, you know why he's using the word, he used the kite, the K word, or whatever you want to call it. And they began to explain why that's wrong. And apparently he understood. And there were various rabbis, the Chabad rabbi, other rabbis, Federation, I don't know, different groups reached out to him. And the last thing I saw about him was a picture of him. This was around Purim time. I think it was delivering Shalach Manot in the Miami area. So sometimes we educate, sometimes we cancel, but sometimes we try to educate. And there was an example of education, I think, working very, very well. In terms of the definition, this is a definition that was created in, I think, 2004-05 in the wake of the Durban Conference, which was just the sort of debut on the world of the most vociferous anti-Israel, anti-Semitic harangues, propaganda attacks that we have seen. I know people from all political stripes who were there, Jews who were just in utter shock about it. And one of the reasons we didn't hear more about it is that it happened the same time as 9/11. In the wake of that, people who work in this area from many different places in the world put together this definition, this IRA definition. It was compiled in the United States. It wasn't written by one person. It was a compilation. And it has great emphasis on aspects of criticism of Israel, which can become anti-Semitic. Now, as I said, it's not ipso facto criticism is anti-Semitic, but they can become, as you've, I'm sure, heard tonight and during the day and during this meeting. And it placed great emphasis there. It also talks about anti-Semitism from the right, but most of the focus is on the Israel piece of it. And it's very clear that those different aspects of it say this can be part of it, need not always, but it gives examples. These are examples that can be part of it. It has, over the past, I guess, of 2005, the past 15 years, been adopted by countries, soccer teams, football teams. If I was in England, I'd say football teams. Rachel's maybe working on football teams, given her connection with the Patriots, et cetera, or with Bob Kraft. It's been adopted by the Holocaust Museum. It's been adopted by countries. At this point, to say we're suddenly going to come up with a new definition, I don't think makes sense and is really efficacious. The debate is whether it should be adopted into law and what that means. To put it, enshrine it into absolute law is, of course, problematic because we do have that pesky thing in this country called the First Amendment. But I think that it is a valuable working definition. It's a working definition. It's not enshrined inside. It's to give administrators. Look, one of the problems we have on campus, and I'll finish my answer, a long answer, but as I say, I've drawn on. This goes back to where I began, and maybe it's a good point to bring it together, Avi, in the sense that often when Jewish kids show up in campus in whatever provost's office or dean's office, who is delegated to handle, racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, whatever attacks, misogynist attacks on campus, by and large, Jewish kids don't present as other kids who are victims of prejudice. Remember, punching up, they look comfortable, come from parents who are comfortable. not the first ones in their family to go to campus, et cetera, to go to attend college or whatever. The point to understand is that anti-Semitism has it's a prejudice, but with its unique aspects. The Jews, now I don't easily draw analogies, and I'm not analogizing here, but we do learn from history. The Jews in Germany, most of them solidly middle class, some upper class, comfortable. If you had said to them in 1931 what was going to be by 1935 when they wouldn't be citizens anymore, they would have thought you were crazy. I'm not saying we're going towards the same way at all, and anybody who would say that I said that, you're wrong. I'll deny it, and I know something about denial. But words matter. Words count. Words can be very powerful. Be careful of your words and listen to the words that others use.
Thank you, Deborah. 100%. I agree, and I wanted to thank you for sharing that. And you know, something I said in one of our breakout rooms is that it's another like tool in the toolbox for Jewish students to be able to use when something's more defined clearly for an administration. It's easier to then help find a solution for it. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Words do matter. It's something that's important for all of us. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're out of time, but thank you for sharing with us your wisdom. It was incredibly enlightening, I think, for everyone, certainly for me. I don't know about anyone else.
Well, if you learn something, that's a good thing, because you deal with this all the time. I'm not pushing my own book. You can take it out of the library. You can borrow it from a friend. But the book is written, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, was written just like Noah. It was written for college students. It was written because these are the questions I've been asked by my students. So it might be helpful to you. Don't worry about it. I'm not pushing it, but if you're looking for something that's a guidance, it might be a helpful tool.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Deborah, and thank you for—
My pleasure. I wish you all well. Have a good summer. Happy Lag BaOmer. And be careful when you burn those, make those fires. And not so long, Chag Sameach for Shavuot, and have a good summer. Thank you all for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So thank you everyone else for being with us and for joining us at Alums for Campus Fairness. We hope that you learned with us and took some things away with it. I want to thank you to all of our co-sponsors for being with us today. And thank you all. You'll be hearing from us tomorrow, and you'll be able to have an opportunity to fill out a form so that you can get the book from Noah Tishby and to fill out a survey so we can better ourselves. Thank you and have a great evening.